Hi, and welcome to your next lesson from your Modern World History course. This video follows on from the video on the League of Nations, marked section 2.3, and if you haven't watched that one already, it's probably worthwhile doing so before you try and tackle this, as what we're actually still talking about is the League of Nations. But the topic of this particular video is the Manchurian Crisis. Manchuria is an area of China that was disputed with Japan and was invaded, and we're going to look at the League's response to this. And again, we're talking about why the League wasn't effective. But our story doesn't begin in China, it begins in the USA. And actually, we need to consider a bit of a financial arrangement which had been going on following World War I and through the 1920s. And that is that America had been lending money to European countries, to Britain, to Germany, to other European countries, and that money had been funding recovery in those countries' economies. We know, for example, that this was really important in Germany, where the Chancellor, Stresemann, had used that money to really get Germany back on its feet, and the 1920s was known as the Roaring Twenties because of this recovery. But in 1929, the American Stock Exchange, based on Wall Street, crashed, and this is a picture here of Wall Street. Now, stocks and shares are based on a price, so the amount you buy a stock or share at is its value, and that can go up as well as down. And what happened in 1929 is that the value of stocks and shares went right down. It went through the floor. It's what's known as a stock market crash because the drop is so severe. Now, when that drop occurred, it didn't just affect companies. It affected public confidence as well. And what Americans began to do was to panic and withdraw their money from banks. You can see here people queuing up outside the bank to withdraw their cash. Now, by withdrawing their cash, of course, it made the situation worse, and the crisis became a crisis of available credit. Now, really interestingly, this is really similar to what's actually happened quite recently. We talk about the credit crisis and the credit crunch. This is a picture from a British high street, and this is people queuing to get money out of Northern Rock Bank when that collapsed. Really, really similar situation. What it leads to is that banks running out of money, and the banks then can't lend money to other people. This is why it's called credit crunch. Without this credit, which credit being borrowing money, so think of it as a credit card, without this, it means that banks aren't lending to businesses, it means they're not lending to people, so they can't do things like buy houses, and it means that the economy comes to a halt. Now, the American response, understandably so, was to begin calling in some of these loans that they'd been making to other countries. And this is exactly what they did. They started to ask for money back from, for example, Germany. And when Germany began to ask for money back, Britain, who was also owed reparations as part of the Treaty of Versailles, began to ask for money back from Germany as well. And the knock-on effect of this crisis in America was that it was felt around the world. There's a phrase, when America sneezes, the rest of the world catches a cold. And the idea behind that is that this impact was felt elsewhere. For example, we've got here a picture from Britain, people marching. Why were they marching? They were marching because unemployment had reached massive, massive figures. Now, what's this got to do with China and Japan in particular? Well, Japan was a big exporter to the US. So Japan would sell particularly silk to America, and they would make a big profit from that. They would use that money to then buy raw materials they didn't have access to themselves. But once America went bust, they began to put a tariff, almost like think of it as a form of tax, on imports to protect their own production. So this made Japanese imports much more expensive, which meant that fewer people bought them. This caused a problem in Japan. Japan actually had a right to build a railway and maintain a railway through Manchuria, through this area of China. Now, Manchuria is an interesting area because actually it's got excellent supplies of coal, iron and oil, things that Japan was finding difficult to find, particularly because they were getting less money from America now for their exports. And what happened is they formed a plan. And who formed the plan is kind of a matter of dispute now amongst historians. It's largely accepted that this was begun by the army. But basically, the plan was to fake a bombing on this railway line and to fake that this railway was being attacked. Now, you can see in the photograph here, this is a photograph of the damage to the railway, you can see that the damage to the railway is not significant. This part here is the part missing from the railway. The bomb, which was believed to be set off by Japanese soldiers, destroyed only a tiny section, actually not even enough to stop trains going through. A train did still manage to pass through after the bomb had gone off. But what was important about this is it gave Japan a pretext, a reason to attack into Manchuria and to send its army through, which is what they did. Now, Japan's army was already based there. They had a kind of a garrison nearby. They sent soldiers through and were incredibly successful. There were about 500 Chinese casualties to just 2 Japanese lives being lost in this attack, partly because of the surprise nature of it. Japan had been preparing for this, and they had their soldiers in position ready to act. Incidentally, if you don't recognise the flag here, this is China's flag. This is the flag that they were using at that time. Now, what did China do? Well, China reported the incident to the newly formed League of Nations. What a perfect opportunity to test out this ability of the League to arbitrate in decisions and to produce a fair outcome for everyone involved and to stop aggressive acts just like this one. But there was a problem. Japan was a major member of the League of Nations. So the League of Nations was kind of caught in a tricky position with this one. What did they do? Well, what they did is they decided to set up an investigation. A commission was set up under Lord Lytton, and the commission was going to go and investigate what had happened. It took the commission, this is Lord Lytton over here, let's find him here. So here he is, just in the centre here, wearing his coat. Obviously, this is what he wore at home, his kind of home outfit, jogging trousers, etc. But anyway, it took Lord Lytton over a year to report, and when he did report, he reported that it was entirely Japan's fault. Japan, of course, was claiming that this was an act of self-defence, that the railway had been bombed by China, and that they were just acting to protect their interests. But in Lord Lytton's report, in an official League of Nations document, it was set out that it was Japan that was at fault. Now, what could the League of Nations do? One of their main things they could do was send an army. Not interested in doing that at all. Another thing they could do is economic sanctions. They could refuse to trade with Japan. But Japan's main trading partner was the USA, who, if we remember, were not part of the League of Nations, so that trade couldn't be interrupted. Japan, though, not happy at all. They were furious at the response of the Lytton report, and as a reaction, they just left the League of Nations. So by leaving, they completely circumvented any of the recommendations of the League. A year later, in 1933, Japan fully invaded the Chinese province of Johor, and then in 1937 it began its full-scale invasion of China. So overall, the Manchurian Crisis showed a couple of things. One, it shows us the impacts of the Great Depression, and it shows they were being felt in the Far East as well as in Europe. But two, it showed that the League of Nations was incredibly powerless to act once there was an aggression that was taking place by a major power.